Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He is chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, a member of the January 6th Select Committee, and was the lead impeachment manager for the first impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Chairman Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and thank you for your patience with that history lesson. It just strikes me on a day like today, which is a historic day. As you know, it is an historic day, subpoenaing members of the House like this. To see the way it used to be and to see the way enforcement of ethics, enforcement of what the kinds of things you're trying to enforce were a completely bipartisan effort in the House and the Senate.
I'm so glad that you did. And I had never seen that footage before. It really is breathtaking to consider how far the Republican Party has gone from those days. Mitch McConnell, who could give a speech like that, and then more recently call in a personal favor with his Republican members, urging them to vote against a bipartisan commission to look into the first violent attack on the Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. So there you have him imploring his colleagues, that was then, to do the right thing, to do the ethical thing, saying that most people don't think we can do the ethical thing. And today, what is he doing? He calls in chits to stop an investigation into January 6th, but also another illustration of just how far the GOP has gone from those days where ethics seemed to matter. Kevin McCarthy, caught recently lying about what he was saying in the aftermath of January 6th. That's not a scandal. The scandal is that if he wouldn't lie, he couldn't occupy Republican leadership. You have to be willing to lie about something as fundamental to our democracy as whether the last election was legitimate if you want to be part of GOP leadership now. That's how much the Republican Party has changed under Donald Trump.
I want to listen to just a few seconds of Kevin McCarthy on this tape that was recently released just to show the kind of evidence you're trying to get at. Let's listen to this.
The only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass. And it would be my recommendation we should do that. That would be my take, but I don't think he would take it. But I don't know.
I suppose one of your questions from that to Kevin McCarthy could be, why should Donald Trump have resigned at that time? But when we look at evidence like that, we have to assume that you know an awful lot about what Kevin McCarthy did that day, what he said that day. What more are you trying to obtain from Kevin McCarthy through testimony?
Well, you're right. We do know a lot about this, but most of what we know, much of what we know, we are hearing secondhand. And of course, no one would be better positioned to testify about conversations that he had with Donald Trump than Kevin McCarthy. And indeed, he's making reference there to what he would tell the president. Well, what, in fact, did he say over the phone with the president? What was the president saying to him on January 6th? We are hearing from other members, as we did earlier from Herrera Butler, that the president, irritated with McCarthy when McCarthy was begging him to call it off, said, well, these people who are out there attacking the Capitol, these people apparently care more about the election than he does, or words to that effect. So there's a lot we would like to ask Kevin McCarthy. These other members we subpoenaed today, some allegedly were involved in seeking pardons. Now, why did they think pardons would be necessary? Or were involved in an effort to overturn the election that a federal judge in California recently proclaimed was likely a criminal act, violated multiple laws. So these witnesses have clearly relevant information. If their oath of office means anything to them, it means obeying a subpoena when called to testify.
I think we both know sitting here that our audience listening to us right now does not expect anyone who received these subpoenas today to comply with them. Is there any reason that you have a greater confidence in that than our audience does?
I would never want to second guess your audience, Lawrence. But, part of the reason why, as you were pointing out, these circumstances are so unprecedented is not just that we're doing an investigation of a violent attack on the Capitol that is obviously completely unprecedented in terms of stopping an election result, But the reality is that when we've asked members to come in, we haven't had to subpoena them. Even as recently as the Russia investigation, at a time when I believe it was chaired by a Republican, Devin Nunes, we had a Democrat and a Republican with relevant information. We asked them to come in. They both did, to be interviewed by our committee. They didn't require a subpoena. They didn't try to fight it. And so what's unprecedented here is you have Republican members potentially involved in a plot to overturn the election, but also, if they do refuse, are ready to refuse legal process. They're willing to break the law to avoid having to come in to testify about what they know.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you very much for leading off our discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.